everybody. Thank you for coming back for another episode of Real Cannabis. I've got a really special guest to me today, Shane from Migro. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Chad. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely my pleasure. I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time because little do you know, for years I have been aware of you. I have been watching your channel. I have been making light purchasing decisions based off of a lot of the videos that you have published. I've learned a lot from you and kind of carried that on to teach others. So I'm really excited to kind of dive into a lot of these topics. But my first question is why lighting? What about lighting made you say, I think I want to pursue this. I want to kind of be an authority in this space?
Yeah, it was kind of accidental in a way. About 15 years, well, I started growing, I was 20 plus years ago, early 2000s, and started off like everybody else, with fluorescence and high pressure sodium, and then onto metal halide and ceramic metal halide and all that stuff. I was growing in my attic, and in my attic, I had to deal with uh, the high temperatures in the summer, and it used to kind of frustrate
Mhm.
me. In fact, I had to just stop growing in the summer. I couldn't, the attic was uninsulated, so I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And so LEDs were just coming out around, it was around, when was it now? I'd say it's around 2014 or so. So I've been growing about 10 years, and I started doing the DIY stuff with early LED technology. In fact, I bought some stuff from very early grow lights from China, and they were terrible. They were absolutely
Yeah.
terrible, and I was having a disaster, and I didn't know what was going wrong. They looked bright, they seemed bright. They promised everything, but nothing was happening. So at the time, I made a big sort of it's kind of silly expenditure, really, looking back on it. But anyway, I bought what's called a quantum meter, which is a light meter, and I spent, I think it was about $1,500 on it at the time,
Wow.
and tested my lights, discovered how to test, worked out how to test them properly,
Mhm.
tested them, and discovered they were junk. And so I was like, well, I've started, so you need to, make this work. So I started doing the DIY stuff, buying my own components, building them. I was on forums with other people, all that stuff. And around the same time, my job I got redundancy basically from my job,
Mhm.
and I was out looking for work, and nothing, couldn't find anything that I liked, and thought, well, I have a little bit of time here. Why not start seeing if I could do something with the lighting? And off I went. Yeah, so that was 2015,
Okay.
and formed the company about 6 months later, and just been bashing away at it ever since.
Well, that's fantastic. They say necessity is the mother of all invention, or I know
Yeah,
I've screwed that up, but I think people
yeah, yeah.
familiar with the
Yeah,
quote
well,
get
I'm an
that.
engineer. I'm an engineer,
Okay.
so a manufacturing engineer, and I've been working in different forms of engineering all my life. And what I think is very interesting is the sort of the mashup sort of between engineering and bioscience, and understanding that, and that I find really fascinating. On the sort of bioscience side of it, it's very complex, photosynthesis, all these processes,
Yeah.
but it's never ending. There's constantly papers out, there's constantly new studies and research and tech and all that stuff. So yeah, I find it really interesting.
Well, that's, one of the cool things I love about plants and, audio. I was audio engineering for many years, different kind of engineering. But the one thing that actually taught me was signal flow, and that's if you have a problem, start in the middle. And we could use that with plant diagnosis. We could, relate that to the garden. So there's kind of a lot of spillover there.
Mhm.
Um, but just that grinding, wanting to find a better way and improve. And 2015 was really kind of an exciting time. I'm in Washington State. We in Colorado voted to legalize in 2012, but 2014 is really when the first sales began. That also allowed home grow. And I mean, you can probably confirm this, but the amount of R&D money spent on lighting technology has just, I don't know, blossomed over this past decade. Is that kind of what you see reflected in the product offerings as well?
Yeah, well, the sort of be the basic tech is in lighting is the LEDs, and
Mhm.
LEDs, became the go-to tech, and people were phasing out incandescents and then the CFLs and everything out. And a bit like, you look at computers or TVs or any other of those sort of high volume, highly complex manufacturing processes, and the price has fallen, and
Yeah.
the efficiency or the effectiveness of the product has gone up dramatically. So in 2015, from 2015 to now, LEDs have improved in terms of efficiency at least twice, and are now in sort of dollar per watt terms about a third the price that they were 10 years ago. So about twice the performance and about a third of the price.
Which is amazing, and it will
Mm.
hopefully continue to go that way. When LEDs came out, I was priced out. I was using HPS, the air-cooled hoods, and they worked fine, but you mentioned efficiency, and that's a huge thing for a lot of home growers because efficiency translate into a lower power bill and better flower. So, would you kind of say maybe the days of and we'll just strictly speak efficiency here. But efficiency speaking, are the days of, the HID systems, HPS, the metal halides, are those kind of done as far as efficiency goes?
Well, they're not really, because I was just watching TV, a news report on the TV last night talking about raids on illegal grow operations in the United Kingdom, and just
Oh no.
our neighbours here, and looking at all the HPS systems in these big grow houses. But they were bypassing the meter, the electric meter. So there's a lot of people and a lot of states, I believe, in the US. Well, some states in the US, the electricity price is still very low.
Hmm.
Um, I think if you're here in Ireland, electricity is about 25 cent per kilowatt hour. I
Okay.
think you have a wide range in the US. It could be anywhere from 10 to 30 cents per kilowatt hour. At I'd say I take it about 17 cent per kilowatt hour, which is the US national average, or last time I checked. If you buy, say, a 500-watt LED, cost you $500. If you buy a high pressure sodium that'll put the same output, it'd be probably equivalent of about 700-800 watts of HPS, which doesn't exist, but it would cost you, let's say, $150 to buy a
Yeah, much
cheap
less.
high pressure sodium system of equivalent wattage. Within 1 year, at those electricity rates, within 1 year, you'll have paid back the extra expense of the LED in energy savings. And then obviously you're making savings every subsequent year to that. So from a efficiency point of view, almost everywhere in the world, if you're paying for your electricity, it makes total sense. And therefore, very few people are actually purchasing them now.
Yeah.
However, there are growers, and I covered this recently in one of my own YouTube videos, who still insist that high pressure sodium is the only thing to grow with, that LEDs are not worthwhile, all this sort of stuff, that they don't grow
Mhm.
good weed, all this sort of stuff. So there's a portion of the growing population who are not letting go of their high pressure sodium
No.
bulbs,
No.
and they may die with them, I think. I've sort of
Yeah.
given up on trying to make those arguments with people who are sort of dug into the trenches.
Hmm.
But for everybody else, life is sweet and cheap and easier to grow with, because LEDs, they don't put out as much heat. You don't have to battle with heat any time of year,
That's
and uh, you don't have to replace bulbs, all that sort of stuff.
yep.
So LEDs really, from a logical, rational perspective, are definitely the only way to go. Yeah.
Yeah, and if in an ideal world, if I had a large room, I would probably just want to run like a checkerboard LED mixed in with some HID systems, but that's not what most of us are doing. We're either or for the most part,
And why
especially in
why
the
would
tent.
you like to do it? Why would you like to mix the two?
I would like to do that just for spectrum. There's some cultivars that are a little bit older that for some reason they tend to express better under the spectrums of like a HPS,
Mhm.
but these are kind of minor nuances. They're things that if you don't have the rest of your grow dialed, you might not get that same expression.
Okay.
Um, but with everything dialed, I really would like to kind of run a little bit of a mixed spectrum, but unlimited space, unlimited budget type of scenario.
Yeah, I did a big search. So this is my sort of counter argument is if I had a HPS factory or, and many, there's many grow lighting companies have stopped making, big HPS producing companies that have stopped making them. But
Hmm.
if that argument were true, so I'm skeptical about whether HPS spectrum produces something that LED can't.
Okay.
Um, I'm just skeptical about it, and I'm skeptical because I've never seen any evidence at all from anybody ever. And I've asked, the subscribing population on my channels, and I've searched around for studies, and nobody to date has ever demonstrated to me that what you're saying is true. In experimental, as in a side by side controlled
Right.
test, all that sort of stuff. Never seen it. And I would suspect if it were true, and I don't mean that you haven't experienced this, because
Right.
this is a
I'm
different
not,
thing.
it's okay.
No, but this is a different thing. And it's so if you have experienced a better result with high pressure sodium with a particular strain, for example, than you had with LED, than you have with LED, it may not be the lights. And I mean that in the sense that it may not be the spectrum. Some people tell me, for example, that the photons are different coming from a HPS because it's from burning gas, and those
Right.
photons are different than the ones that come from LED. Now, as a scientist, a photon is a photon to me,
Okay. That's
and
where my brain went.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So a photon is a photon, and it's a bit like, if you took pure water and you said, well, water that comes from the rain is different than water you get from, I don't know, a distillery
Ice.
or something like,
Yeah.
whatever.
Mhm.
And you take the two and you test them and you do the sampling, and all that there's no different chemicals in the one water than the other, and they're like, no, but it's different because it came from the sky and it's natural. And it's like, well, there may be something that's not testable, that you can't actually
Mhm.
see with scientific instruments. Um, but in the absence of that, provide the proof. Do
Yeah.
run the two tests, run them side by side, and provide the proof. And I've never seen it. So
Okay.
I suspect that there may be other factors such as environment, like temperature, humidity levels, other things that are coming into play rather than the spectrum. In fact, if you look, what most people say is you really need the sun spectrum to get all the expression. But if you
Mhm.
look at a HPS spectrum, it looks nothing like the sun. It's all over the place. It's got all these huge big peaks in these different areas. And LED is much closer to the sun. It provides a much broader range of wavelengths through the power spectrum. Um, and if you were to look at it objectively without having a bias, you'd say the LED spectrum is better.
Okay. And I mean, that's one reason why I really, well, actually, there's many reasons, but Spectrum was a reason why I kind of wanted to move away from that. Controlled tests are a hard thing, especially on like the home grow level to duplicate, to replicate. It's not that easy. And that's kind of one of the things about, the scientific tests.
Hmm.
We do pull data from them, but I often wonder how it really translates to real world applications because there's going to be variables that are controlled there that we don't control. One thing that I love too about, a lot of the videos I've watched from you over the years is you kind of told us how companies cheat a little bit. One of them being this silver walls. They are going to reflect. So when you're testing your par, the presence of those walls skew the number. So
Mhm.
that's just one example. And there is a breeder that I have in mind who is a fan of that theory. So I'm going to ask them, I'm like, what is your data? What is the qualitative, quantitative? What do you have that supports the opinion other than just opinion? And hopefully he can send me something. And then hopefully that can start a conversation too.
Yeah, no, there are a lot of studies happening around the world. So I get like a notification from a scientific publishing house that notify me, for keywords. So I see anything like
Mhm.
sort of cannabis related stuff. And in the US, there's been um, scientific studies done and published, mostly on medicinal strains, so CBD strains.
Yep.
But, we're talking about cannabinoids. It shouldn't really matter if it's a CBD strain or a THC strain. And globally, there's been a lot done as well. And there is very little evidence, or the evidence says that there's very little difference between most grow light spectrum on the performance of the plants, either in terms of yield or quality. And myself, as I said earlier on, I've grown with fluorescence. I've grown with high pressure sodium. I've grown with metal halide. I've grown with ceramic metal halide. I've grown with red and blue LEDs. I've grown with
Ah,
countless white LEDs with red diodes in them as well. And with all of them, I grew great weed. So if one of them is right, tell me why the other ones seem to do pretty good as well, you know? But there is controlled tests done by people who are studying this in labs, in hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of labs, with
yeah.
with very sophisticated environment control, with the best measuring equipment for environment, for lighting, for rates of photosynthesis, for measuring yield, for all, doing spectrography tests on the outcome to look at all the different compounds in the weed.
Mhm.
It's all being done. It's being done very professionally. And it's telling us the same thing over and over again, that spectrum doesn't matter that much. And yet we still want to believe that there's a special spectrum out there that will produce magical results. It's the part of the human condition. I don't quite understand it, but we want to believe that, by putting a few little diodes here and there, or, the curve being slightly different on one spectrum from
Right.
another, that it's going to do something special. Now, it's not to say there aren't differences. So, if you're growing a strain in a commercial facility and you got 1,000 plants and you're growing that strain over and over again, and you're able to manipulate it a little bit, maybe to, you know, spread a little bit earlier,
Mhm.
create a canopy a little bit earlier, maybe a little bit taller, maybe be a little bit shorter, something like that. When you're doing it at that scale, these small differences can make, a big
Yes.
difference. So they can be worthwhile doing, but they're genetic specific.
Yeah.
So for the home grower, these guys who get tunable lights, for example, that
Yeah.
spend like 50% more than a regular light to get a tunable light so that they can adjust up and down the different spectrum. I often ask them, what are you going to do with it? So, what are your adjustments going to be, and what's that based on? Is it based on any science
And
anywhere?
how do you
Because
measure that?
yeah, yeah.
You know?
So, um, when people ask me what to do with them, I say turn them all up, turn everything on as full as you can from day one. It'll
Make a
all
smiley face in the graphic equalizer.
yeah. Do you remember those in the 80s? You had the stereo with all the buttons, and everybody left them in the middle because otherwise you were just distorting the sound and making it worse. Um, Go for high quality components, a good quality light. Just I know it's actually I think it's almost impossible for anybody listening to this to do this, but just don't think about spectrum. Don't even worry about it.
Coming from a lighting expert here
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
That I mean,
I could try and sell you something and tell you I've got the best spectrum. I've got the one that nobody else has. But it would be a lie.
well, that's refreshing. I appreciate that answer. It gives us a lot to really think of because there's efficiency was kind of what we were sold on previously when we were merging from one light iteration to the next. Now that we're all kind of there, it really is spectrum, tunable spectrum. As sexy as that sounds, as much as we want to play, God, a horrible idea, just in my opinion, because we don't have the knowledge of what those slight adjustments are going to do. Again, we don't
Well,
really necessarily have a
actually,
way to properly measure that and carry it on
there's
from test to test.
yeah, that there are people have measured it, and I could point to you half a dozen studies where hundreds of plants have been grown in different growth chambers where the
Okay.
environment is controlled, where the lighting is designed to, these different light recipes that are designed
Mhm.
to test different theory about the plant's response. And this is with white LEDs now, with variables of white LEDs. And the results have shown, beyond just sort of natural variation, small little variation between grows. There's nothing significant has been demonstrated where, and believe me, if it was, I'd be on it
Yeah, I
tomorrow
believe that.
and I'd be trying to sell it to you because I
Yeah.
would see it and I'd say, this is valuable to people. And I'm going to generate value by making it
Mhm.
available to people and explaining to them how to use it. If I could, I would do it. I would have done it yesterday. I'd do it tomorrow. But I've seen nothing either in my experience or anybody's in any of the reliable testing that's been done. I hear plenty of people uh, tell me about, oh, in their experience.
Mhm.
Um, but I usually, when I dig a little bit deeper, um, that experience is not uh, reliable in terms of it's not replicable. You can't
Yeah.
take that experience and hand it to somebody else because, as I said, there's nothing to compare it to. It was done in isolation. I grew great weed with this light, therefore this light is amazing.
Right.
It's not science, and it's not something that I can latch onto and do anything with.
Yeah. Well, speaking of science and spectrum, though, it has kind of led us in the wrong directions, or we've misinterpreted it at one point. And I mean, the blurple, the blue and the red, is the easy example because individually, even though monochromatic light isn't good for growing, but individually, blue and red spectrums have morphological effects on a plant.
Mhm.
So how did we go from that data, that science, to be like, blurple, blue and red is the way. We must only do that. And
Because it,
since we're saying that, okay, go ahead.
it
I'll let you
wasn't
answer that.
yeah, it wasn't science led, it was technology led. It was because blue and red LEDs were all they had.
Okay.
It was
Wow.
before white LEDs were developed to a stage that they were powerful. So if white LEDs, they have that yellow sort of um, egg yolk colored surface on them.
Hmm.
That's a material called phosphorus. And if you peel back it's like a jelly on top. If you have an old light that it's broken or something, it's fun to sort of mess around with a little bit. But if you peel off that phosphorus coating over the LED, underneath is a blue LED. Okay. So
Wow.
it's a blue LED, shines through the phosphorus and gets diffracted, for want of a better word. And it fragments into all different colors of light. So blue, green, and red, which makes white. And the amount of phosphorus will determine whether it goes to a more sort of warm white color or a cooler, sort of more blue tinge
Hmm.
white color. Um, but in the days of blurple lights, they didn't even have um, efficient white LEDs yet. So they just use the blue ones, which are quite efficient, and the red ones, which are quite efficient, and they just use the two of those because that's all they had, and they sold it to you
Interesting.
on the basis that um, it was much more efficient than a white light because plants didn't absorb green light, and therefore there was no point in having it in there. It was a waste, and that was total nonsense. It was just
Damn.
marketing nonsense.
I fell for
Um,
marketing again.
yeah, yeah, and we'll do it over and over and
Again.
over again. Um, it's if you yeah, and that green the thing green light doesn't grow plants. I was
Mhm.
battling with that for about the first 6 or 7 years in this industry, putting videos out about it, correcting people, da 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 da. So it was out for about 2 or 3 years, but it hung around for about 6 or 7 years as a belief. And far red is the current one. Like everybody
Mm,
thinks far red is amazing and it's going to do something special. It's well, if you put a lot of it in there, it's going to stretch your plants, which we don't want when we're
right.
indoors because we want plants to be short and dense. Um, Far red does contribute to photosynthesis, so it helps cause growth. But far red LEDs are much more expensive um, and less efficient than red ones. So why add them? All the scientific testing done shows that increasing far red reduces potency and reduces your yield, but people still want it. So,
Hmm.
people will fall for marketing forever.
Yes.
I kind of feel that I feel some responsibility for some reason, which I'm now wondering why and doubting myself, but for to try and correct this and not sell people lies, which I
Yeah.
believe me, Chad, I would love to be able to do that. I kind of have this jealousy, of people who are able to, those people who are just able to sell anything to anybody with no conscience.
Yeah.
I kind of
Yeah.
wish I was
Unfortunately.
that person, like, because
Right?
well, it'd
I'd
be a
be
lot
living in a
easier
different house.
than going by the truth and just sort of how you were talking about earlier, grinding away, just with little improvements here and there, and giving people maybe just a really good light for a good price,
Yeah.
without any fairy dust or magic involved.
Uh, yeah, it's funny. I went earlier, digress here. Earlier when I was, late teens, I did some sales jobs and I was really good at it, but at the end of the day, I kind of almost hated myself sometimes. And yeah, by like the early mid 20s, I'm like although I am good, this just isn't for me. I'd rather just shoot straight with people.
Yeah,
It's much better on your on your constitution.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. No, look, seriously, on Spectrum, people try and tell you a lot of things. Anybody listening to this, just try and find evidence. So if somebody says something is special, what's it special for?
mhm.
And show me the evidence of
Yep.
that. So if somebody had a special spectrum that generated weed of a higher quality and quantity than any other light, I would expect them to commercialize that
Yep.
with a research organization or a commercial organization where they would do what we just described, doing a side by side light X, generic light X versus our light, and look how
Mhm.
better our light performed, and here's the results. And isn't it amazing that you don't see them anywhere? um, but it's not to say that some lights aren't better than others, but it's most more down to what we spoke about earlier, which is efficiency. So
Mhm.
you know a more efficient light will be cheaper to run, so that's great. So we want a more efficient light, and then getting into the very simple things with products that we all know, which is probably buy, I hate to say it because, there's new starters out there will be good and smaller companies that will be good, but, brands help. Their brands are a good thing. They are something which people have to manage. Like I have to manage my brand. I don't want my brand to diminish by putting out bad products. So,
Yeah.
it sort of holds you to a standard to some degree of having a brand. And then looking at what they're offering, and trying to determine again, is are these guys selling me something which is well defined and well specified, so
Mhm.
it gives me all the details about the product, the LEDs, it shows a power map of how well the light is spread, it publishes the efficiency details, all that stuff. And after that, it's down to price, and prices are great now,
Mhm.
so great
Well,
time to buy it.
and it definitely. I mean, prices have come down so much. I almost kid in the candy store now because I'm like,
Mm.
hey, I can afford way more wattage than I need, which always was the opposite problem. Is the answer to everything in the HPS days was add more light. So,
Yeah, yeah. And
uh,
and something which I hate to mention it as a side issue, but with all the sort of trade stuff going on at the moment, so
mhm.
for anybody who thinks they can buy American or buy European or whatever with lighting, just know that nearly all the high volume LEDs in the world are made in China, and nearly all the power supplies which power the lights are made in China, and that's
Wow,
about 80% of the cost of a light. So
wow.
even if they're assembled in the US, you still
Mhm.
have to bring the LEDs in, and all of these will be subject to tariffs, which I don't know which way that wind is blowing, but I'm kind of guessing that there probably something is going to stick over time. There's probably
Y-
going to be some tariff of some percentage, which is going to
Right.
carry on and be there for some time. And me, for one, I'm running out of my existing stock, and the new stock, which I'm waiting to ship, I'm waiting to see what happens. But when it does come in, it's going to be more expensive. I'm going to have to charge more.
Yeah.
So I think we're at an inflection point with prices where it's highly unlikely that they're going to go down, and it's
Right.
very likely that they're going to go up.
Well, hopefully, again, necessity, the mother of all invention. I'm probably butchered that twice now, but maybe we'll see some new technologies or some new players in the industry. That's the pie in the sky version, but maybe people will just be
From
like,
an LED perspective, so we'd know about it now before it would be commercially available.
hmm
The chip technology has not changed in 15 years since they first
okay,
developed those white LEDs. The
that's a long
basic
time.
tel Yeah, so the basic tech is the same. They've kind of refined the processing, it's a bit like TVs, really. You're kind of buying the
Mhm.
same TV you were 20 years ago in terms of whether it's LCD or whatever, but they've just got better at making them, and at bigger scale and cheaper at making them. But they haven't. The technology in itself has not changed. The fundamental technology. So there may be, I don't know, LEDs might get a little bit cheaper, but I don't think so. And the form that we have now, so this
Mhm.
bar type light that you see everywhere,
Yep.
that's very efficient to make as well, and it's very efficient from a cooling perspective. It spreads the light really evenly. So it's there will be, of course, there'll be innovations,
Mhm.
but hard to know. I don't think there'll be anything big in the next 3 or 4 years now.
Okay. Well, that's a relief for people who are looking to purchase. But you actually touched on kind of the next subject or where I kind of wanted to go is because with LEDs, we started, most of them that I saw were all what we call the quantum boards, even though I know that's kind of a proprietary term to one company, but a square, a rectangle, we just call them quantum boards. Um, and then we moved to the bar style, which I am more of a fan of the bar style for some of the reasons that you've just mentioned. Also, increased airflow.
Mhm.
Do you think we'll ever go back to that board style, or are bars really the way to go based off of what we know now?
Um, so the board that board style is very good for small fixtures in small tents. So if you're in a little 2 by 2 tent,
Okay.
it's because it's just a very efficient form. Your the board you're putting LEDs on is also basically the heat sink,
hmm
and you can strap your power supply onto the back of it, and there's your light. It's as simple as that. Um, the difficulty, as you say, with the when you want to cover a large physical area, so say a 5 foot by 5 foot tent, um, other than some sophisticated lensing comes out, which might tackle this problem, it's very hard to spread the light evenly over that area with a board that's much smaller than that area, because it's going to have to radiate out. And as I said, without some really sophisticated lensing, it's going to basically provide a lot of high intensity in the center, and it's going to diminish as it goes out to the edges. That's physics, you know.
Yeah.
And then the other way of doing that would be to have maybe 4 boards in there, but then
Mhm.
you end up with either hanging 4 separate boards with 4 separate power supplies, or you have to
Yeah.
sort of connect them together in some way. And when you start getting to that complexity, you're pretty much going back to the bar type light anyway. You're trying to replicate a bar type light in a less efficient way, so it just doesn't make sense. So yeah, for now, I think the bar light is the best, and I haven't seen anything coming down the road that would sort of be an improvement on that so far.
And as someone who, I had pieced together 4 of the SF-1000 boards, the small 100-watt boards in a 4 by 4 I've had 4, as I was, progressing and saving money to buy a different light.
Yeah.
And yeah, one of the big things about that is Power Strip only had 8 slots. 4 of those now are occupied by my lights, and I still have to have my fans, my exhaust, and so that's
Yeah.
that's
And you'd have
the problem.
16 hanging ratchets hanging down, trying to all that stuff. So yeah, just but the packaging now, that sort of packaging of lighting has got much better now the last few years. Where it's all foldable and all that. So you just open them up,
Mhm.
hang them, switch them on, and away you go. I think more, one of the developments in the last few years is there's been the spectrum tuning, but again, I'm not seeing. I don't think the volumes are huge in terms of how many people are buying them.
Right,
Um,
I don't think so either.
I think everybody likes the idea of them, but when it comes to paying 50, 60% more for that technology, I think people shy away. Controllers are a big thing now, and integrating the
Yeah,
lighting into your controllers. So, I was involved in controls engineering in my early career, and these little industrial environmental controllers, for example, would have been 10 times as much as they are now, when you put all the sensors and everything together. So electronics have really come down in price. They got more
mhm,
sophisticated, and the ability to control your whole grow, including your lighting, through one device, with your app and all that stuff. That I think over the last 3 years is the biggest development in the industry. And just making sure, for me as a lighting manufacturer, making sure my light is compatible with those systems and works with them.
ugh, that's tough.
Um,
Software
yeah.
is a beast.
Well, this is pretty easy actually, because we have sort of a protocol really with lighting, which li- the
International
the
standards, okay.
well, yeah, it's a simple control mechanism, and it's in fairness, it's an industrial control mechanism of 0 to 10 volts, a little DC signal, and whether you're turning a dimmer knob on a light, or you're using a controller, or doing it remotely or on board or whatever, it's a 0 to 10 volt signal is going into that power supply, and it's telling it how much power to output. And you can integrate that with your controller, so that it brings it down to 0% to switch it off basically, and up to 100% when it's in flare or whatever you want to do with it. um, and that's great. That's great, because I think, I would have had those controls in my little home setup, nearly almost over 20 years ago now. But I could do it because I was an engineer, and I could sort of figure out the components and put them together
Right.
at reasonable cost. But being able to manage your environment will give you much healthier plants, much more consistency in terms of growth and yield. And I think most importantly, it helps you avoid the disasters, which, for, if you're growing in your attic or your basement or your shed or wherever it is, we don't check our grows every day. Things can happen. And if you're not monitoring it, a couple of days, your plants can be dead. So to have these controllers working away on your behalf, making sure you don't kill your plants, um, and keeping them sweet in their sweet spot with humidity and temperature and everything, I think it's fantastic. It's a great development.
Yeah, I have to let go of the reins. I have a couple different systems from a couple companies here that I'm going to be trying soon. I've always been, just the old school guy. If you want it done right, do it yourself. I still have over here a manual calendar that I write all of my dates down, and it hangs behind me usually. So, yeah, technology. Oddly enough, I worked in technology, which probably makes me shun technology outside of, of
The
the work
hobbies,
life.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell you where things have progressed from a lighting point of view is with intensity. Um,
Mhm.
so what they've discovered, again, scientists in labs have discovered, along with commercial growers, is that cannabis is like a super strength or superpower plant. It can take much higher light intensity for much longer than most other plants on the planet. It's really is standout in this way. So just to give your perspective, so sunlight in midday in summer would be about 2000 par. Okay. Now there's complicated units. I'll say them once and then I want 2000 micromoles per meter squared per second. Okay. Micromoles is the number of photons, the amount of light, the quantity of light. But let's just call it par for simplicity. So if I went out, as I said, midday, middle of July, summer, 2000 micromoles. When we started growing, so when I started growing, it was HPS really, would have been a 600 watt HPS in a 4 by 4
Mhm.
tent.
Yeah.
And that would deliver around 500 micromoles. And that was considered high intensity. Um, Commercial growers now are growing at about 1400, 12 to 1400 micromoles. So they're not quite up at the 2000 micromoles the sun would hit, although the plants can take it. Um, but they're nearly 3 times as much as we would have been 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And there's a number of reasons for that. Uh, First is because we know we can. So, as I said, we've tested it with plants, we've discovered its capacity. So, we're pushing the light intensity up higher. But it's only feasible to do that if your lights are efficient. And the reason is heat. So, I actually tried to do this back in the day. I tried to put 1000 watt HPS into a 4 by 4 tent,
Mhm.
and it was impossible to maintain the temperature. There was so much heat being radiated from the fixture onto the canopy. They were just frying, it was frying the canopy. And so much air was required to blow through that tent to evacuate the heat that depending on the weather outside, but the humidity was being dropped down to very, very low. And then you're having to water your plants like crazy and you're overstressing your plants. It's like a war escalation. One thing goes up, you got to fight it with another and then another, and you sort of run out of capability. With LEDs now, we can push up to that high, um, so we can have that same power intensity. Instead of having a 600 watt HPS, we just use a 600 watt LED that's 2.5 times more efficient. So we're getting the same amount of light, but very much less heat, about a quarter of the heat, and no radiant heat. So LEDs don't emit. If you put your
That's
hand under a HPS bulb, you'll feel that radiated heat
yeah.
warming the top of your hand. Put your hand under a very intense LED and you won't feel that heat. So um, it's possible now to get almost 3 times the yield from a grow tent than it was only 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, and with that, you get, you can look at this either way. You get more yield or you need a smaller space. So I used to have a 4 by 4 at home. I then dropped down to a 4 by 2. I then was only growing in that with autos. I was growing autos. I know it's a sin and I should be.
I'm an equal opportunity grower.
Yeah, well, I think I think they're just as good. And what I like about them is they're quick. So I used
Mhm.
to grow 2 grows. I can't grow now. I have 2 teenage sons in the house, and, I
Yeah.
have to have sort of moral authority in the household, so, but up to very recently, I was only doing 2 grows over the winter, and that was me for the year, you know? So,
Mhm.
it gives you these advantages which weren't available before, and, it that from a lighting point of view, the lighting drives everything else. The lighting is the energy source for the growth of the plant. And when you do that, then all your other systems have to catch up. So you've got to be able to keep the environment on point, because the plants are a lot more stressed now, or can be, if they're not, if the humidity isn't correct, if the temperature isn't correct. So I think at these, my analogy is like, it's like driving a Ferrari, at these high speed, high power intensities.
Mhm.
And you got to be on point. Everything's got to be
Yeah.
working well together, or you'll crash.
Absolutely. And there's we could get to this in a second, but there's just those little minor tweaks that I always say, yeah, and you kind of touched this before. Commercially, when we're talking 60, 70,000 plants, 1 extra gram per plant makes a really big difference. In my 4x4 tent, an extra gram per plant makes almost negligible difference to
Mhm.
me. So some things relate. We were talking about efficiency too, and kind of footprint, board versus bars. Another thing that kind of comes up in that realm, or that range of topics, is just height versus coverage. Um, I think because we have far more intense lights, we can run them a little bit higher and maybe get some better coverage. But I also see a lot of advice to run it, boom, smack down on the top of your canopy. So
Yeah,
what are your thoughts there? Height versus
always run it as low as possible,
okay. Why is
because
that?
because again, if you imagine your plants, the top of your canopy is a plane like this, and it's my hand,
Mhm.
and I put the light fixture up here. Now that light's going to radiate out. It's not all going to sort of collimate down onto that grow. It's going to radiate out, and a lot of light is going to go over here. It's going to overshoot the plant if the light is high. Now we have reflective walls, so it'll
Yeah.
hit the wall and come back, but not all the light will hit the wall and come back. So you have what's called efficiency losses. And so you keep that light as low as possible over this. So if it's lower down at this same angle now, instead of overshooting where it did up here, it's now hitting the plant canopy. The problem can be is if you have that central light source, and you hang it low, that you can have that high intensity directly underneath. But remember, we've now got a bar light, which is a plane as well. So you've got one plane over the other plane. And so with LED bar lights, I put out some stuff on my channel about grow light hanging height, but I've tested hundreds of LED lights of all sizes, from 80 watts up to 1,000 watts, and there are basically two hanging heights. Okay, so first hanging height is for lights of about sort of 250 watts and above, and that's
Mhm.
16 inches. And for smaller lights, it's 12 inches, and that's it.
Okay. And that actually is right around where I hang mine, which is interesting because again, and we see this on the power maps for manufacturers too. There are different recommended heights, but the closer you get to the canopy, the higher the number in the center gets and the lower it gets in the corners, whether we're talking boards or bars. So
Yeah,
is 16 inches kind of that happy medium? Because
exactly.
you do. Okay. So
It's a
the closer you,
compromise. It's a
okay.
compromise. So it doesn't mean, if you want to get the most light onto your plants, just drop the light straight onto the plants. And but the that uniformity, we call it. So
Mhm.
the measurement for that is divide the highest number by the lowest number. So if you have 1,000 par in the middle and 500 on the edge, that's 1,000 over, or sorry, 500 over 1,000. So it's a uniformity of zero point 0.5. That's pretty good, actually. Zero point 0.5
Okay.
is pretty good. Um, you can get some that are better, but usually the benefit of doing that, so the lowest is usually right in the very corner. and there's not a huge amount of plant there going on. And really, you're looking at it's not like the average; it's the median. It's like are most squares, are most parts of the plant canopy getting a reasonable level of light distribution. And what I generally say is you don't want it going much over sort of 1200 in the dead center, sort of 1000 or 1200 in the dead center. And you don't want it dropping much less than half of that when you get to the edge. So there are really good tools now. Again, there's been tech developments now which have been really great for the home grower, which is you can use apps with
Mhm.
either your smartphone, so either your iPhone or your Android or whatever. Again, I have some data. I did some testing on this on my blog posts and on videos, and you can use those apps to measure power. So a power sensor, an accurate quantum power sensor costs about $300 or $400. Home grower doesn't want to spend that money and doesn't need to spend that money. The apps will be sort of 95% accurate, and you can set up your own light. And really, the thing to do is to measure the center and around the center and measure the edges, and just look for that. What's the max intensity, and then what's the fall off, and trade that off till you get to that zero point 0.5 number.
That's a nice round equation that people can get to, and I'm in my head, I'm like, "Okay, how would I approach this? How would I do it?" Almost just kind of, again, taking a cue from you, it'd probably be best to find this height with the tent empty, because you could go in, you can lower, and you could get level, accurate readings from the floor, or would you do it with the tent?
There's a small problem with that, is that often
Uh-oh.
the tent floors are white or silver.
Mhm.
And so you're shining the light down on a
That's true.
silver surface and it's shining back up and you're getting noise.
Yep.
So the only thing I'd say to you is if you've got one of those silver trays on the bottom, like the tent material mylar trays on the bottom, turn it over so it's black.
Nice.
Um, and instead of having and bring pretend that's your plant canopy. So drop
Mhm.
your light fixture down to over the floor.
Yep.
And then if you want to be like really sophisticated, you could you could um, do a matrix, do divide your area up with into rows and columns. So say
Mm.
it's a 4 by 4, you could do 4 lines evenly spaced horizontally, 4 lines vertically on the space, and measure in the center of each square as you go around, and that will give you a picture. You'll do your own power map. And if you're really into optimizing everything, that's what I'd highly recommend doing. It take you a half an hour, um, and you'll learn quite a lot about your lighting, and uh, you'll gain confidence in what you're doing. Now, I will tell you what you will find is if you have a light below 250 watts, hang it at 12 inches height. And if you light over 250 watts, hang it at 16 inches, 16 to 18 inches. That's what you're going to find, because I've done all those tests on every light available. But if you want to do it for yourself, it's an interesting exercise to do, and it'll give you confidence, as I said.
Now, how do you feel about people who maybe use the dimmer as their adjustment? They'll have it, let's say, just 20 inches above, and they'll have a higher intensity, and then they'll lower that as the plant grows up towards the light and reaches that desired level.
Yeah, so using a dimmer is advisable for small plants, but you should always maintain hanging height. Now, this is a lighting engineer, and you can just ignore me if you want, because all I'm going to do is save you a few watts and save you a little bit of money. So you can totally ignore it if you want. But if you want to do it properly, you'd maintain that. So it doesn't matter whether you have small plants or big plants. Your optimal hanging height is going to be the same. You know,
Okay.
that trade-off between getting the most light onto your plants and getting it most uniform will be the same. So maintain your hanging height as the plants grow up, and bring it back down when you've got young plants. For young plants, there's another discovery or realization, is that after that very first few weeks where cuttings are just um, getting their root system going, or little seedlings. Um, so that first couple of weeks, you don't want to push them too hard because you could basically dry them out. If they don't have a good root system and a good reservoir of moisture, you can put high intensity light on a very small seedling or cutting, and you can kill it, because it cannot take up enough water to respire to keep itself cool. Um, However, once you get to about 3 weeks old, and that's usually for me, you're 6, 8 inches high, you've got a few true leaves coming out, probably four
Mm.
branches, coming out. Um, you can pump it right up straight away. And the difficulty is if you're in a big tent and you got four little pots in the middle, it seems
Mhm.
like an awful waste, and it is. So, what I would suggest to people is, if you're growing continuously and you want to grow as much as possible, have a seedling tent or have a starter tent, not a veg tent. That's old school. That's metal halide sodium. But have a seedling starter tent and grow your plants until they become big enough to put into your big tent. And what I mean by big enough is that the canopy will have spread out enough. So imagine this area here is my grow tent, and I want to put 6 plants in it. If they're this big, when I look down at the canopy, they're too small to put in here. Okay. But if they're like this big each, I would put them in.
Mhm.
And but I would start off with those 6 plants in a little tent this size, over a little spare separate tent with a little 100-watt lamp. And I would grow those seedlings until they're that size, and then transfer them over. And that means that you're using your grow tents more efficiently. So your main tent will have a shorter growth cycle,
Mhm.
because you're doing the first 4 or 5 weeks outside the tent. So you basically learn to start your new plants 5 or 6 weeks ahead of when you think you'll need them, so that they'll be big enough when you take the other plants glow, you can put the new plants in. Um, And yeah, as soon as you put them into that big tent, as soon as they're like 4 weeks old, you can have full light intensity. So you can be going for that 1200 micromoles. Now, I wouldn't do
Even
it.
in veg?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Do you think so? There's only one sort of, not caveat, but condition to this, in that people usually be doing 18 or 20-hour light cycles in veg.
Mhm.
And if you have if you have a really high powered light delivering high power intensity, you're going to waste some light, because the plant can only take up so much in a day.
Mhm.
There's a measurement for it. It's called moles, which makes no sense, but just it's a measurement of how much light a plant absorbs over a given day. And for example, if I was growing autoflowers, I would recommend about half the light intensity that I would the half the maximum light intensity I would grow photo periods. And the reason is because the light period is nearly twice as long. You're growing them for 20-hour days. And the plant can only absorb so much light over a whole day. So there's no
Mhm.
point in giving it really high light intensity and it's growing, growing, growing for the first sort of 14 hours of your veg cycle. And then for the last 4 hours, you're just wasting light, because it just cannot
Right.
convert anymore. It can do no more photosynthesis. It cannot create any more sugars. It can't. So there is that caveat. But at the same time, you want big plants. You want to switch them over to to flowers sooner, as soon as possible. So give them as much light as possible. And generally, people aren't overlit. So I would say, you should be up at 80% in veg, um, within 4 weeks, 80% on your dimmer, and you should be at 100% by the end of veg, switching to flower. Um, and when you're switching them, putting them into that, if you are putting them from a seedling tent or a small plant tent into your main tent, and the light intensity is increasing, don't increase it. Don't give it a big increase straight away. Give it a few days to acclimatize to the higher light intensity. It can be a bit of a shock to plants, and it can stunt
Mhm.
their growth by doing it. So do it quickly, but not immediately. Not a step change, but give it a little bit of a curve.
Ramp. Now, what you're describing here, just the maximum amount of light the plant can take in during the day, as measured by moles. Is this the same as DLI, the daily light integral?
It is.
Okay.
It is. So integral just means the sum of. So the daily light integral is basically saying, so say I did 1,000 par over a 12-hour light cycle. We'd count up all of that over the day, and that would give us a number, which is the daily light integral. So it's the total amount of light over that period. Now, if we were outdoors, the sun would be coming in and out of shade. We'd be using sensors that would have to be measuring it instantaneously through the day, and you'd be making a complex measurement at the end of the day. With our lights, they're electric, they're on or off. We're usually not messing around with them. So we're getting a consistent light during the day. So to put it in perspective, um, greenhouse growing of tomatoes, for example, it would typically plants would absorb 40 moles per day, and that's like 12 hours of good sunshine in a greenhouse for the day. Um, in cannabis, we kind of took that number as well, and that would equate to uh, it'd be more or less putting a 500-watt light into your 4x4. So it's about 900 micromoles instantaneous, 900 par instantaneous average. If you measure that up over a 12-hour day, it delivers you about 40 moles. For autoflowers over a 20-hour day, it's about 550 par over that day. And then if you want to go into the what I'd call expert growers area or commercial growers performance, you'd need a 750-watt light in that 4x4, delivering about 1,300 micromoles, and that would give you 60 moles per day. And that's considered to be the maximum that cannabis can absorb in one day. It's very high compared to other plants. It's very high performance, but the curve, as you increase up to 60 moles a day, stays pretty consistent. Once you get to 60 moles, putting more energy, light energy in, you stop getting that return. That's yield increasing, and then it stops. And then you actually start overstressing the plants. You keep going, and it actually reduces the yield because you're giving it
Diminishing.
too much. Yeah,
Yeah, the diminishing returns is a real thing.
yeah,
And two, in that last scenario, a lot of times they're running CO2, which means they need up more intense light, more heat. You have to have your nutrition on point. You have to have so many other things in line to take advantage of it.
yeah.
That maybe not every home grower is at yet. CO2, a topic for another day. But I do have, one thing I have a hard time reconciling is, and this is common for a lot of people, a lot of growers, is they'll run their 20-hour veg or their 18-hour veg cycle, and they'll have it pegged at 100%. Now, you're receiving a certain amount of par, a certain amount of DLI, but when you switch to 12-12, we're all told, we all thought, we all know that you need more light and flower. But if that same light is at 100% for 12 hours a day versus 18 hours a day, are we actually now giving less light or less usable energy in flower?
In short, yes. But so the plant does not, there's no change to the plant which makes it photosynthesize in a different way when it gets into its flowering stage. The plant is still the same plant. The leaves are the same. Its mechanism of photosynthesis is the same. I would put it a different way. I'd say it's hungrier, or
Okay.
there's more it can do with the light because it's producing the flowers that we want at that point. Um, so the plant is the same in veg as it is in flower. It's the same plant. It's just uh, using the energy it's taking from light to do different things.
Hmm.
So it's not that it needs more light when it's flowering. It's that give it as much as you can when it's flowering to get the biggest flowers that you can. So when I specify a light, I specify a light for flowering. So in a 4x4, I'd specify a 500-watt light for a home grower.
Mhm.
Now, I would specify running that in veg at 60 to 80% because that's giving you your 40 DLI.
Mhm.
And so, dim it down in your veg stages only because of the DLI, not because the plant can only take lower intensity. It's the amount of light the plant is receiving over the light cycle. So I hope that makes sense in saying, you're getting your light to deliver the best performance the plant can in flowering in that 12-hour light cycle. So you're pushing that light intensity right up there to get a good yield. And if you use that same light in the veg stage at a 20-hour light cycle, you're providing too much light.
Okay. Well,
So just dim it down a bit. Yeah.
one of the favorite things I learned from my teacher in audio engineering school is you have to learn the rules before you can break the rules. Once you know how things work, you can then kind of manipulate them to get the results you want, and
Yeah.
that you directly goes back to like the hanging height. If I'm hitting my DLI, regardless of what the hanging height is DLI like the ultimate, the God number. As long as that's met, I can do different things and see similar results? Or is it really a combination of, high spectrum, uh, different things that influence it?
So basically, spectrum isn't going to affect yield or quality. Okay. So you're going to get the
Okay.
same mass of plant at the end. You're going to get the same potency, the same taste and smell from your plant, irrespective of which spectrum you use, broadly speaking. There are some small marginal benefits you can get from using UVB as a finishing light.
Okay.
But that's stressing your plant, and you can do that in a number of different ways. Lights
Yeah.
using a UVB is just one way. Um, in commercial facilities, they have lots of different ways of stressing the plant in the end to try and force it to produce more secondary metabolites, more oils, more cannabinoids. Um, but in terms of how how do I set up my grow light to get the best result? For me, I wouldn't even look at a spectrum chart. Wouldn't care. So I'd get a light that had um, delivered the right intensity uniformly across my grow area
Mhm.
for my standard of growing, for what I want to do with it. Like I said, if I'm growing photoperiod plants, I want about 900 to 1,000 micromoles because it's up there in the growth in terms of the yield, but it's not so far up there that I'm going to be
Right.
uh, getting myself into trouble in terms of not having everything else on point all the time.
And this.
Um, so that they would be my most important considerations. And then one that I find is and the uniformity. Looking at that bar chart from the manufacturer and finding out, how uniform is this light? What light are all my plants going to receive? Not just the ones in the
Mhm.
center, but the ones in the
Right.
corner. And then I would be considering if I am growing autoflowers, do they have a light that's specified for me for autoflowers? Because I'm not growing photo periods. I have a different light cycle. I need different light intensity. Or similarly, if I'm growing seedlings or something else, or if I'm a really expert grower, maybe I do want to push up to 1,200 micromoles average, and making sure again that I'm getting a light that's properly specified for the task that I'm doing.
This thank you. It's been a great answer, and I'm looking at the time now, and I've kept you longer than I had asked for, so I absolutely appreciate that. And I'm looking at my list of notes here, and I'm writing as we're going, and we could easily go 3 times as long as we
We
already
could, yeah.
have. So I'm like, okay, how do I? Where do I stop? Maybe hopefully, we could do a number two someday. Um, Otherwise, I would keep you indefinitely here, and I
Is
don't
there
want to
any
do that.
important questions that we didn't cover that I can cover
To
briefly?
Yes, 2
I'll be
things,
quick.
and I'll let you take your pick here, and, my time is open all day, but again, respectful of your time, I know it's a little bit later where you are, and it's almost dinner time, which nobody wants to miss. Maybe you can take your pick here, and a quick version, even though I know you could expand for hours, and I highly encourage people to go and check out your YouTube channel, which I
Okay.
will have linked down in the show notes, because a lot of the things we've talked about today, you go further in depth and you branch off, and so people can continually learn. So guys, definitely go check out Shane's channel. But all right, I'll toss it up to you, grab bag. um, UV light for bug control or underlighting, which one would you like to quickly try to give
Let's
a
do them both. I'll do them both quickly. So,
sweet?
underlighting, there's no magic to it. What we were talking about having that grow light on top, um, you can push power intensity higher by supplementing with lights underneath. It's been done in greenhouses for years. They'd string lights down amongst the tomato vines, all that stuff. It's been done for years. It doesn't produce a magical extra result though. So, for example, if I had a 500-watt light below and 250 watts of under canopy lighting shining up, I could produce the same by just having a 750-watt light above. So, um, it's not greater than the sum of its parts. Using underlighting, it
Right.
doesn't do anything magical. It will produce higher quality buds from the lower part of the plants,
Mhm.
which makes it more saleable for commercial
Yeah.
growers. But that's about it. If you're in a tent and you want to push stuff higher, and you can, so if you've got a 500-watt light and a 4x4, you are an expert grower. Instead of throwing out that 500-watt light and getting a 750-watt light, you can just supplement it with under canopy. And that's where I think for home growers, it's great.
Yeah.
On the UV side, yes, UV can be used to help control vermin, insects, and it can help convince them not to hang around on the plants, but it
Right.
doesn't it doesn't generally kill them. There's a little bit out online of people using UVC. It's a dumb idea. UVC is very dangerous. It's not
Yeah.
present in nature. It causes cancer. It'll kill cells. It'll kill your plants. It's a stupid idea to use them. And the people I've seen selling them don't even specify. They don't even give safety advice or anything like that. So it's one of
Yikes.
the dumbest things I've seen ever. Never mind in grow lighting.
That's a lot of things.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty
Yeah.
dumb. It's a classic case of somebody marketing some stuff
Mhm.
who
Right.
knows nothing about what they're doing and is causing nothing only than danger and confusion. So yeah, UVB has shown to improve um, potency. Sorry, not potency. Secondary metabolites. So taste and
Sure.
smell a little
Mhm.
bit,
Yep.
but it's marginal. um, and it can help a little bit, with things like powdery mildew and stuff like that. It can help, but in the same way, putting something out in the sun will sterilize it.
Right.
It's a similar thing in that UVB is just providing those UVB UVB radiation that the sun would otherwise. So it's not magical. You're just bringing a little bit of sunshine indoors, and I believe insects are developed to survive in sunlight, so I think they'll survive your little crappy UVB fluorescent lamp as well. So no, they're not. Unfortunately, they're not a magic bullet.
Okay, well, perfect. Thank you for kind of the quick hit, because again, those are two things that are more and more talked about, but again, more and more marketed. Well, I'm sure we've both seen things. I could point to a few examples of things that everybody had to have. It was the only way. Your plants are going to
Yeah,
die. You're going to grow a third foot.
yeah,
Uh, 2 years later, nobody's talking about it.
yeah,
So
yeah,
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 there's those things will come and go.
yeah.
Um, Shane, this has been awesome. Is there anywhere you would like people to go or to search out more information from you? And again, I will put these in the show notes so they'll be
Yeah, if you can just
clickable links.
I'll just ask you to link the website below. That's the
Perfect.
simplest thing. That links to all the social media channels. So whether you like your YouTube or TikTok or whatever. I have old-fashioned handwritten blog posts, if you prefer things in writing. And yeah, it's all there. I try to cover as many useful topics as possible in a way that people can understand easily, and hopefully being of benefit to people.
Absolutely. You've been a benefit to me. You've been an unknown teacher to me over the years, and I highly recommend your channel, your information. Always have, always will. So thank you, Shane, for taking your time and to hang out with me today. It's the first time we've done this.
Yeah,
So
it is. It's
thank
been
you.
fun. Time has flown, and I've really enjoyed it. And best of luck.
All right. Well, you have a great day, Shane, and I will talk to you later. Everybody in chat, I hope you enjoyed the show. I know you did, a lot of good information. Leave any questions or comments down below, and make sure to go check out Migro. Catch you later, everybody.